What really happened to RadioShack? Once, on quiet afternoons, you could wander into a Radio Shack and hold the future in your hands. Wires, wonder, and the hum of possibility. But where did it all go? How does a place that once sparked imaginations fade into silence? This is the story of what really happened to RadioShack. Founding in Boston, 1921. In the early months of 1921, down by the cobblestone streets and gaslit corners of Boston, two brothers with nimble minds and a box of wires began a small enterprise that would one day speak to an entire generation. Theodore and Milton Dukeman weren't chasing fortune. They were chasing signals, whispers across the airwaves carried by coils and tubes. At a time when radio was still an untamed frontier, they offered not only resistors and solder, but a place for wanderers of the wavelength to gather, ask questions, and build something from their own two hands. They called it RadioShack, borrowing a term from the sea, where the earliest shipboard radios sat in wooden sheds above decks, crackling through storms. The brothers' store wasn't much to look at, but the shelves were heavy with promise, antennas, voltmeters, crystal sets, and the knowledge that anyone could learn. Their catalog soon traveled further than they ever could, slipping through mail slots across the country. And as more Americans tuned in, RadioShack grew, not through flash or showmanship, but through trust and a simple idea that progress belongs to those willing to take it apart and see how it works. World War II and first catalog. As the years passed and more homes began to buzz with the static of invention, the little shop that started with a coil of wire and a box of dreams found itself facing a much different world. When the 1940s arrived, the world was bracing itself for a storm, and America stood on the edge of transformation. Across the Atlantic, battles raged. At home, factories hummed with new urgency. It was in this charged atmosphere that RadioShack, still a modest business run by men who understood both circuitry and service, made a bold decision. They put together their very first catalog. This wasn't a glossy magazine of luxury. It was a carefully assembled guide for those who wanted to build, repair, and connect. An invitation, really, for ordinary folks to get their hands on the gears of the wireless age. Page after page, it listed vacuum tubes, coils, antennas, and soldering irons, each one a tool in the quiet war of communication. And it arrived in mailboxes at a time when the stakes for staying connected had never been higher. World War II turned the radio from a hobby into a necessity. Troop movements, factory logistics, civilian preparedness, so much depended on clear, swift transmission. That catalog helped RadioShack step into a much larger role, not by changing who they were, but by recognizing what the world needed. As orders poured in and customers turned to them not only for products, but for expertise, their place in the American market deepened. In every town that tuned in, RadioShack was beginning to be counted on, not for noise, but for knowledge. Have you ever heard stories about RadioShack's early days? What do you think made it stand out right from the beginning? Post-war pivot to home audio. After the war, with factory lines shifting from munitions back to consumer goods and families settling into a more predictable rhythm, Americans found themselves hungry for the comforts of home, especially the kind that played music. The Dukeman brothers noticed. They understood that people didn't only want radios to communicate anymore. They wanted them to enjoy. And so, RadioShack adjusted its dial. Instead of focusing solely on ham radio hobbyists, they turned their attention to the growing market of home audio. High-fidelity systems, once a niche fascination, were becoming kitchen table conversation. Across the country, servicemen turned fathers were buying record players for Sunday afternoons and speakers for the family den. Recognizing the shift, the company began offering a new line of products to meet this appetite for richer, fuller sound. but expanding into a broader market required more than shelves and advertisements. In 1954, the company introduced its own brand, Realist. That name, though, didn't last long. Legal friction forced a quick rebranding, and Realistic was born. Short, bold, and far more enduring. Under this new banner, RadioShack started offering amplifiers, turntables, and speaker sets, many of which matched or surpassed the performance of costlier competitors. This wasn't just a product line. It was a message. Quality doesn't need a famous name, and good sound belongs in every home, not only the wealthy ones. The Realistic brand helped RadioShack carve out its place in an increasingly competitive retail world, earning trust from customers who might never solder a circuit but knew what they wanted to hear. And in doing so, it carried the store into living rooms across the country. Retail challenges of the 1960s. But even as the company's speakers sang their way into American homes, the winds outside were shifting again. As the 1960s took hold, change swept across the American landscape with a kind of momentum that left little room for hesitation. Suburbs were growing, consumer behavior was shifting, and technology, once the playground of hobbyists, was edging toward the mainstream. In the midst of it all, RadioShack had managed to stretch its roots. The company operated 9 retail stores by then, and its mail-order business was reaching across state lines into post offices and porches from coast to coast. From the outside, things may have looked promising. A familiar logo in more towns, catalogs stacked beside the Sunday paper. But underneath the surface, trouble had begun to stir. Retail was entering a new phase. Department stores were getting larger, flashier, and more aggressive. Chain stores were multiplying. Discount culture was on the rise, and customers were beginning to expect more options, lower prices, faster service. What had once been a stronghold for hobbyists and tinkerers now faced a question of relevance. The Duckman brothers, though wise and determined, found themselves up against currents they hadn't predicted. The pace of change in the marketplace left little time to adapt. Economic headwinds pushed back on growth. New competitors entered with deeper pockets and flashier storefronts. And so, what began as a season of expansion quietly turned into a crossroads, one where experience and tradition were no longer enough to guarantee survival. Tandy Corporation Enterprises. By the close of that turbulent decade, the cracks beneath RadioShack's foundation were becoming too wide to ignore. What had once been a haven for radio tinkerers was starting to feel out of step with a world racing ahead. Across the country, television sets flickered in living rooms, transistor radios buzzed in teenagers' pockets, and a quiet revolution in electronics crept into garages and classrooms. Amid this fast-changing landscape, the little store built on catalogs and curiosity found itself boxed in by mounting debt and a market it no longer quite recognized. Meanwhile, over 1,000 miles away in Fort Worth, Texas, another company was confronting its own moment of reckoning. Tandy Corporation, best known for leather goods, was beginning to feel the pull of a future that didn't include saddles or belts. Charles D. Tandy, the man behind the name, saw what others missed. The rise of consumer electronics wasn't a trend, it was a transformation. And when he looked at the struggling RadioShack, he didn't see failure. He saw raw potential waiting for someone willing to shape it. Tandy's 1962 acquisition. That vision took form in 1962. With a deal worth $300,000, Tandy acquired the ailing chain, a move many considered risky, even reckless. But Charles wasn't gambling on what RadioShack was. He was investing in what it could become. The purchase set off a transformation not only within the company, but across the consumer technology space. With this single act, Tandy shifted his firm's destiny and ignited a new chapter in American retail, one where resistors and capacitors would sit alongside calculators and cassette decks, and where a once obscure chain would begin charting its way into the mainstream of American life. Once the papers were signed, the hard work began. RadioShack was in deep trouble. The catalog days were fading, and shoppers were walking into stores, wanting answers, not mail-order forms. Shelves groaned under the weight of thousands of forgotten items, and the company had lost its way. Tandy saw a path forward rooted not in flashy storefronts or name brands, but in the people who soldered, built, and tinkered. He pared the inventory from 40,000 to 2,500 items, each one chosen for purpose, not variety. Big stores gave way to small shops near neighborhoods. Mail orders were retired. Corporate ranks thinned. His attention turned to the counter staff, the folks who knew what they were selling. He favored practical, private label products over big brand names, keeping quality high and prices in reach. What he rebuilt was more than a business. It was a meeting place for those with calloused hands and curious minds. Whether you needed to fix a speaker or teach your kid how a transistor worked, you'd find what you needed, and someone who understood why you needed it. Tandy didn't revive RadioShack with spectacle. He did it with clarity, and he gave the company back to the people it was made for. Employee ownership shift. Charles Tandy understood that a store, no matter how full its shelves, only came alive when the people running it had something at stake. So he did something bold. Instead of treating store managers as hired hands, he treated them as partners. Each one was given the opportunity to own a share in the very place they unlocked each morning. That small gesture changed the nature of the work. Running the register and stocking parts took on a different meaning when the profits didn't go to a distant boardroom, but circled back into the hands of those doing the daily labor. This change didn't happen in isolation. Tandy backed it up with strategy. He turned to data, combing through years of mail-order records that tracked where the company had customers and what those customers had once needed. That information, once scribbled on order forms and typed into ledgers, was now reimagined as a map for growth. It showed where interest in electronics wasn't simply a passing fad, but a deep-rooted demand waiting to be met. By combining local commitment with careful planning, each new RadioShack location wasn't placed on a whim. It was built with purpose. And in a business climate where larger chains were throwing up stores by the dozen, Tandy's approach stood apart, calculated, personal, and anchored in the people who understood the trade. The result was a network that grew not only in size, but in depth, one small shop at a time. Rural expansion via local dealers. And as he strengthened the foundation from within, Tandy turned his attention outward, toward the far edges of the map. In the parts of America where city limits stretched further than traffic lights and Main Street ended in gravel, Charles Tandy saw a possibility. These towns couldn't always support full-scale company stores, but that didn't mean they lacked customers with curiosity or ambition. So Tandy tried something different. He invited local dealers, often hardware owners, appliance sellers, or hobby shop operators, to carry RadioShack's inventory as part of their own businesses. It was a quiet kind of expansion, low on cost, but high on reach. This strategy spoke directly to a certain kind of shopper, the kind who didn't mind turning a screwdriver or splicing a cable. These folks weren't browsing for high-end stereo systems to show off in their living rooms. They wanted circuit boards, soldering irons, and coaxial connectors. Tandy was clear about it. They weren't chasing glamour. They were chasing function, value, and the satisfaction of making something work on their own terms. That approach hit home with a growing base of builders, programmers, and early adopters, many of whom were wiring together the beginnings of what we now call the digital world. Peak growth in the 1980s. By the late 1970s and into the 1980s, RadioShack had morphed into more than a specialty store. It had become part of the national vocabulary. Over 4,600 locations stood across the map, tucked between movie theaters and banks, nestled into shopping plazas and strip malls. Families who once relied on department stores for big-ticket items were now ducking into RadioShack to grab parts for school science projects or early home computer systems. Inside, customers found more than shelves. They found opportunities. Whether it was a CB radio for long-haul truckers, a pack of resistors for hobbyists, or a rechargeable battery kit for a weekend project, the store catered to all levels of know-how. And there, near the register, sat a promotion that became almost folklore: the Battery of the Month Club. Walk in, show your punch card, and walk out with a free battery. It was simple, but effective. That foot traffic added up, and in return, the company learned more about its customers, what they bought, what they came back for, and what they might need next. Bell System Breakup, 1982. By listening closely to what people needed, RadioShack stayed nimble and ready. That readiness would be put to the test when a major shift in American telecommunications cracked open a new frontier. Then came 1982, and with it, a seismic shift. The Bell System, a telephone monopoly that had defined American communication for decades, was dismantled by court order. For the first time, people didn't have to rent their home phones from a telecom giant. They could own them. This change cracked open a door that RadioShack was quick to walk through. The company filled its aisles with corded and cordless phones, answering machines, and jacks for every kind of wall plate. What started as a niche electronics chain now stood at the crossroads of a telecommunications boom, and business surged. It was a bold response to a national change, and for RadioShack, it proved to be a turning point. Entering the computer era, 1990s. By 1990, nearly 14,000 stores carried the brand name, from downtowns to suburbs across the globe. Tandy Corporation, RadioShack's parent company, doubled down. No longer content to resell other people's hardware, they began building their own: computers, software, components, much of it in partnership with Panasonic. Then came the acquisition of Computer City, placing them squarely in the thick of the computer boom. But as the 1990s rolled on, the world changed again. Online shopping gained speed, and RadioShack stayed rooted to the showroom. Their website arrived late, underdeveloped, and underused. At the same time, they abandoned the realistic label in favor of pricier, well-known brands, alienating the customers who once counted on value over prestige. Inventory issues piled up. Stores leaned heavily into cell phones, a category that came to dominate revenue. But when that market shifted, RadioShack had no backup plan. What looked smart at the time left the company exposed. In the end, it wasn't a single decision that unraveled things. It was a slow drift away from what had once made the company strong, an understanding of its customers, and a love for hands-on work. As the world accelerated toward the digital age, RadioShack struggled to keep its footing, and with each step away from its roots, the ground beneath it grew a little less steady. Shift to mobile phones. And yet, instead of revisiting its foundation, the company pressed deeper into its newest gamble. If technology was marching forward, RadioShack hoped to march in step by doubling down on mobile phones. The company had already staked much of its future on mobile phones. In the early 2000s, it pivoted away from its roots in gadgets, cables, and components to embrace partnerships with major wireless carriers: Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. It wasn't about the devices themselves so much as the plans they came with. Each activated line meant a hefty commission and access to long-term revenue tied to customer contracts. In theory, the math made sense. Phone plans were sticky, customers rarely switched, and with millions of Americans upgrading phones regularly, the numbers looked promising. To take full advantage, RadioShack reshaped the layout of many of its stores. Kiosks and branded spaces popped up inside existing locations, each one manned by employees trained to pitch voice and data plans rather than transistors and speaker wire. The model resembled a marketplace carved into a storefront, with competing brands vying for attention under one roof. At the same time, leadership turned its attention inward. With over 5,000 stores in operation, they sought to weed out the bottom performers. Store managers at 1,500 locations received blunt warnings: improve or be replaced. That mandate rolled through the organization like a thunderclap. Eventually, more than 1,700 managers were either demoted or dismissed altogether. What followed was a workplace culture thick with tension, where cooperation gave way to competition and security turned into suspicion. Profit margins and warning signs. But beneath the surface of those sweeping changes, from branded kiosks to managerial crackdowns, was a company standing on increasingly shaky ground. By 2005, RadioShack posted $5 billion in revenue, a figure that turned heads. But behind the headlines, profit margins told a different story. With only $267 million in net income, the company operated on a razor-thin 5% margin. In retail, that's a dangerous tightrope. A single stumble, rising costs, shrinking commissions, or a dip in traffic could send the whole operation wobbling. And as the retail world began to tilt toward online sales and digital convenience, RadioShack found itself unprepared for the climb. The ground beneath its model was shifting fast, and cracks were already starting to show. Losing ground in mobile market. The troubles weren't confined to the balance sheet. They were beginning to seep into the day-to-day mechanics of the business, especially in how RadioShack fit into the rapidly evolving mobile landscape. As the mobile phone market became more saturated and consumer habits evolved rapidly, RadioShack's strategy showed signs of wear. Their role in the wireless business had narrowed to that of a middleman, handling transactions but not shaping the experience. The stores pitched contracts for major carriers, yet offered little beyond the brochures on display. With no say in pricing and no exclusive offers to draw customers in, they couldn't compete with the simplicity and savings offered directly through carrier websites. This lack of distinction grew more costly as online shopping became second nature. Buyers grew confident in making their own decisions, clicking through options from the comfort of their homes and bypassing the middle entirely. The commissions that once propped up RadioShack's revenues began to shrink, and as foot traffic slowed, so did the brand's relevance. In the years following 2005, the business struggled to find its balance. Sales slumped, and leadership became a revolving door. 7 CEOs passed through the top office in less than a decade, each one offering new plans, none of them long enough in the seat to see a strategy through. Without steady hands at the wheel, the company's direction became increasingly reactive, chasing short-term fixes in place of long-term rebuilding. That uncertainty at the top left RadioShack vulnerable, unprepared for the next disruption looming just over the horizon. iPhone and retail disruption, 2007. In 2007, the release of the iPhone didn't just change how people communicated, it disrupted the very foundation of consumer electronics retail. Wireless carriers began taking the reins, selling directly to customers, and cutting back the generous commissions that once fueled chains like RadioShack. The economics of smartphones became harder to navigate. Service providers were spending heavily to subsidize devices and clawing back their margins from third-party retailers to compensate. That shift exposed the fragility in RadioShack's strategy. Mounting debt and trapped contracts. In the years that followed, the pressure from shifting industry dynamics began to close in. By 2012, the situation had grown dire. losses mounted. In 2013, RadioShack secured a large credit line from GE Capital and a second loan from Salus Capital, a lender known for stepping into high-risk territory. But these funds came at a cost. Conditions tied to the loans limited the company's ability to scale back, including restrictions on closing underperforming stores. When RadioShack attempted to shutter weaker locations to stop the bleeding, Salus blocked the move, citing clauses in their agreement. In effect, the company was trapped, spending more than it made, with no room to maneuver. With each passing quarter, the weight of missed opportunities and mounting losses grew heavier. The holidays arrived with hope, but delivered a final blow. First bankruptcy filing, 2015. The pressure culminated during the 2014 holiday season, once a dependable bright spot on the calendar. But that year, sales fell short. Inventory sat unsold, and expenses outpaced income at a dangerous clip. In early 2015, after exhausting nearly every avenue, RadioShack filed for bankruptcy. A reorganization followed. About 1,700 stores remained, each rebranded in partnership with Sprint. The plan was simple: combine mobile retail strength with RadioShack's existing footprint. But inside those stores, the contrast was stark. The shelves that once held everything from microchips to meters were cleared out, replaced by displays devoted to phone plans and carrier branding. The character that had once made RadioShack a haven for tinkerers and tech-minded shoppers was pushed to the margins. Sprint partnership fallout. As Sprint's logo grew larger in the storefront windows, RadioShack's legacy grew harder to recognize. The partnership, though necessary, cast the brand into the background. For customers walking in, the experience no longer reflected what RadioShack had stood for. And despite the effort to reinvent itself, the decline continued, a slow unraveling of a name that had once stood proudly on main streets across the country. The Sprint partnership, while strategic on paper, failed to spark a true revival. Second bankruptcy, 2017. By the time 2017 rolled around, the second bankruptcy filing arrived not as a shock, but as a quiet confirmation of what had been unraveling for years. This time, the decision was swift and sharp. Most of the remaining locations were shuttered. What once blanketed the nation in red and white storefronts had been reduced to a scattering of outlets, more flickers than flames. For those who stayed behind to keep the lights on, the weight was heavy. With every round of closures, morale slipped further, leaving behind a staff more uncertain than ever. In the wake of that collapse, RadioShack tried to regroup. The shelves and counters were replaced by a website. Batteries, headphones, adapters, small tools, and a handful of branded accessories were now boxed up and shipped out instead of handed over the counter. This pivot toward e-commerce was a last stand in a crowded marketplace. But they weren't alone. Giants like Amazon and Walmart had spent years perfecting their systems, building warehouses that stretched for city blocks and algorithms that anticipated a shopper's next click. Against that machinery, RadioShack's presence felt small. Retail e-commerce ventures acquisition, 2020. Then came a spark of new interest. In November of 2020, Retail e-commerce ventures, led by Tai Lopez, announced it had acquired the brand. It was another in a series of retail rescues for the company, which had also taken over names like Pier 1 and Dress Barn. The idea was simple: revive the brands online, keep the names alive, and tap into their familiarity. Under new management, the product mix stayed largely the same. Cross-promotions began popping up, linking RadioShack to other Rev-owned properties and educational tools like MentorBox. The logo was back. The branding had polish. But the terrain hadn't changed. Competing against corporations with global logistics networks and pricing models fine-tuned by data scientists was no small feat. The climb has been steep. Despite its long legacy, RadioShack's late embrace of digital retail left it trying to catch up on a path others had been paving for decades. While others had built their online identity piece by piece, RadioShack arrived late to the race, forced to play a game of catch-up in an arena where speed, scale, and price often decide the outcome. If RadioShack came back stronger online, would you shop there again? RadioShack's original store culture. Step into a RadioShack and you enter a place where curiosity met craftsmanship and tools sparked discovery. Shoppers ambled in with open questions until displays or knowledgeable clerks pointed them toward answers. The store did not hand out pre-assembled solutions. It offered parts, instruction booklets, and a space to learn by working hands-on. In an era when understanding passed from person to person, whether a teenager assembling a shortwave receiver or an adult wiring a car stereo, the staff acted as mentors rather than mere salespeople, using brief sketches and practical demonstrations to explain each component. The catalog served as an idea launcher, its slim pages filled with product images, technical details, and prices that made dreams attainable. For a child far from the nearest electronics outlet, flipping through those pages could spark science projects or future careers. Although the original chain nearly disappeared, a handful of independent franchises continue this tradition, their modest stores recalling the old spirit. In today's landscape of sealed gadgets and automated apps, these shops offer a way to get hands-on with technology, proving that the promise of building, exploring, and innovating is alive and well. Legacy and final reflection. Still, the name carries weight. For many, hearing RadioShack stirs more than brand recognition. It calls up images of pegboard walls lined with parts, of dads and sons troubleshooting a project, of school science. Fairs built on things bought with allowance money. It brings back the joy of discovery, the thrill of hands-on problem solving, and the quiet pride of fixing rather than replacing. Inside those four walls, generations came to understand technology, not through manuals or lectures, but through trial and error. They turned knobs, soldered wires, asked questions, and learned something new each time they walked in. Whether you were wiring a model rocket or learning BASIC on a Color Computer 3, RadioShack had a way of making technology approachable, even exciting. Sears history. What happened to Sears? Remember the excitement of getting your first bike at Sears or flipping through the wish book? For generations, Sears symbolized the American dream. But now, its silent aisles and lost catalog evoke nostalgia instead of thrill. What went wrong? Join us as we explore the rise and fall of this retail giant, a cautionary tale of innovation and heartbreak. The beginnings of Sears. Let's rewind the clock and set our retail time machine for 1886. We find ourselves in North Redwood, Minnesota, where a young Richard Warren Sears is working a humdrum job as a station agent. Life takes an unexpected turn when a shipment of gold, watches, unwanted, and destined for who knows where, lands on his platform. Now, most folks would have seen just another day at the station, but Sears? He sees an opportunity, a chance to make something of himself. He buys the entire lot of watches, a bold move for a young man with limited means, and then flips them to other station agents for a small profit. This little venture sets something ablaze within him. He realizes he's got a knack for this business thing. Fueled by this newfound confidence, Sears takes a leap of faith. He quits his job and sets up shop in Minneapolis, selling watches through the then novel concept of mail order. A year later, he joins forces with a skilled watchmaker named Alva Roebuck, and together they form a partnership that will become a retail legend, Sears, Roebuck and Company. Now, you might be thinking, So they sold some watches by mail. What's the big deal? But this was no ordinary mail-order business. Sears and Roebuck weren't just selling watches. They were selling convenience, accessibility, and a whole new way to shop. Their timing was impeccable, tapping into a growing desire among rural Americans for access to goods they couldn't find in their local general stores. What started as a simple watch business was about to blossom into a retail empire that would reshape the American landscape and redefine how we shop. Sears Kit Homes. But Sears' ambition didn't stop at filling your mailbox with enticing goods. They were constantly innovating, pushing the boundaries of what mail order could achieve. By 1908, they took a giant leap forward with a truly audacious offering: the Sears Kit Home. That's right, you could order an entire house from their catalog. Imagine that. All the lumber, nails, windows, doors, even the kitchen sink delivered right to your train station, along with detailed instructions for assembling your dream home. Over 70,000 of these kit homes were sold between 1908 and 1940, a testament to their popularity and affordability. They offered a pathway to homeownership for families who might not have otherwise been able to afford it. Sears wasn't just selling products, they were selling the American dream, packaged and delivered with remarkable efficiency. These kit homes dotted the landscape, becoming a symbol of Sears' ingenuity and their commitment to serving their customers' needs in truly innovative ways. They stand today as a reminder of a time when a company dared to think outside the box and revolutionized not just retail, but the very concept of homeownership. Sears' willingness to embrace new ideas and cater to the evolving needs of their customers would continue to drive their success for decades to come. The Sears catalog. But hold on, because the story's about to get even more exciting. In 1893, a game-changing development sweeps across the nation. The government introduces rural free delivery. This may sound mundane, but for Sears, it's a stroke of genius. Imagine, suddenly, Sears can reach potential customers in the most far-flung corners of the country, places previously beyond the reach of their mail-order operation. And they seize this opportunity with gusto. The Sears catalog, once a humble pamphlet showcasing watches and jewelry, transforms into a colossal tome, bursting with an unimaginable array of goods. Let's step back in time and imagine you're a farmer's wife in 1900. Your nearest store is a long, arduous journey away. Then one day, this massive catalog arrives in your mailbox. As you flip through its pages, a whole world unfolds before your eyes. Sewing machines to lighten your workload, bicycles to shorten your errands, musical instruments to brighten your evenings, even prefabricated houses, all available with the stroke of a pen and a money order. The Sears catalog becomes more than just a shopping guide. It's a portal to a world of possibilities, a wish book that brings dreams within reach. Children pore over the toy section, circling their heart's desires. Families gather around the catalog, debating the merits of different tools or home furnishings. It's a social event, a source of entertainment, and a connection to the wider world. In a way, the Sears catalog was the Amazon of its day, the Netflix of its time, delivering convenience and entertainment straight to your doorstep long before the internet or television became commonplace. It revolutionized rural life and cemented Sears' place as a retail powerhouse, a company that understood the needs and desires of its customers in a way that no one else did. The Golden Age of Sears. Step into our retail time machine once again, and let's set the dial for the 1950s, the Golden Age of Sears. Imagine a bustling Main Street, USA, the heart of every town, and there it is, the iconic Sears sign, beckoning shoppers with its promise of quality and convenience. Sears isn't just a store, it's a destination, a one-stop shop for everything the American dream entails. As you step inside, you're greeted by a dazzling array of products, a symphony of colors and textures. The latest washing machines gleam alongside stylish clothing racks, power tools hum in anticipation, and the air is filled with the tantalizing scent of popcorn from the candy counter, mingling with the rich aroma of new leather from the shoe department. Children tug at their parents' sleeves, eyes wide with wonder at the captivating toy displays. It's more than just shopping. It's an experience, a family outing, a source of both excitement and comfort. But what truly set Sears apart wasn't just the sheer volume of goods they offered. It was the personalized customer service that made you feel like a valued guest, a member of the Sears family. Need a new refrigerator? The salesman isn't just there to make a quick sale. He takes the time to understand your needs, helping you find the perfect model for your family. And if, heaven forbid, something goes wrong with your purchase? No problem. Sears' legendary satisfaction guarantee has your back. This commitment to customer service built trust and loyalty, making Sears more than just a store. It was a trusted partner in building a better life for millions of Americans. The Sears of the 1950s was a retail powerhouse at its peak, a symbol of American prosperity and ingenuity. What's your most memorable experience with Sears? Share it with us in the comments. The first retail store. Let's zip forward in our retail time machine to 1925. Sears has been the undisputed king of mail order for decades, but the winds of change are blowing. America is urbanizing, cars are becoming increasingly common, and consumer habits are evolving. Sensing a shift in the landscape, Sears makes a bold, some might say risky, move. On February 2nd, 1925, they open their very first retail store on Chicago's West Side. It's a gamble, a departure from their tried-and-true mail-order model, but it's a gamble that pays off handsomely. The store is an instant success, a bustling hub of activity that combines the vast selection of the catalog with the immediate gratification of in-person shopping. Customers can finally see and touch the products they've only dreamed about, experiencing them in a tangible way. This first store marks a pivotal moment in Sears' history, a turning point that sets the stage for a new era of expansion. Over the next few decades, Sears opens hundreds of retail stores across the country, becoming an integral part of communities from coast to coast. These stores become more than just places to shop. They're community gathering places, offering everything from appliances and clothing to auto repair and even photography studios. Sears, once a mail-order pioneer, has successfully transformed itself into a brick-and-mortar behemoth, demonstrating its remarkable adaptability and its ability to stay ahead of the curve. This transformation would propel them to even greater heights, solidifying their position as a retail giant for much of the 20th century. The Sears Wish Book. But perhaps the most enchanting chapter in Sears' story unfolded every autumn when the highly anticipated Sears Christmas Wish Book arrived in mailboxes across the nation. This wasn't just a catalog, it was a passport to a world of childhood dreams, a portal to the magic of the holiday season. Children would spend countless hours poring over its colorful pages, their imaginations running wild as they circled the toys that captured their hearts. Bicycles with gleaming chrome fenders, dolls with eyes that seemed to follow you, train sets that promised endless hours of fun. The Wish Book was a treasure trove of possibilities. Parents, too, would secretly study those circled items, making mental notes for Christmas morning surprises. The Wish Book wasn't just about selling products. It was about creating memories, fostering anticipation, and capturing the spirit of giving and receiving that defines the holidays. It was a shared experience that brought families together, sparking conversations and creating a sense of excitement that permeated the entire season. The Wish Book became a beloved tradition, a symbol of hope and joy that transcended the mere act of shopping. It represented the power of dreams, the anticipation of Christmas morning, and the enduring magic of childhood. Even as the retail landscape changed and evolved, the Wish Book remained a cherished part of the Sears legacy, a reminder of a time when a simple catalog could transport us to a world of wonder and possibility. Craftsman, Kenmore, and Die Hard. Now let's delve into the iconic brands that became synonymous with quality and reliability, brands that were built by Sears and etched into the fabric of American life. First up, Craftsman. These weren't just tools, they were a symbol of craftsmanship, a badge of honor for the DIY enthusiast. Fathers proudly passed down their well-worn Craftsman toolboxes to their sons, knowing that the lifetime guarantee meant these tools would outlast them both. Imagine this. You're working on a project, and your trusty Craftsman wrench snaps. No problem. You simply take it back to Sears, and they replace it. No questions asked. That's the kind of customer service that built unwavering loyalty. Then there was Kenmore, the backbone of the American household. These appliances weren't just functional, they were reliable workhorses, built to withstand the demands of everyday life. From washing machines that could tackle mountains of laundry to refrigerators that kept food fresh for a growing family, Kenmore was there, simplifying life for millions of Americans. And who could forget Die Hard batteries, the powerhouses that lived up to their name? They started cars in the harshest conditions, from the frigid depths of winter to the scorching heat of summer. Die Hard became so synonymous with reliability that the phrase, "It's gotta die hard," was enough to assure anyone that a vehicle was up to the task. These brands weren't just products, they were promises kept, a testament to Sears' commitment to quality and customer satisfaction. They embodied the values of durability, dependability, and trustworthiness that were at the core of Sears' identity. The beginning of the end. Even as Sears basked in the glow of its success, storm clouds were gathering on the horizon. New competitors, leaner and hungrier, were emerging, ready to challenge the retail giant's dominance. The 1970s brought a wave of discount and outlet stores, with names like Walmart and Kmart popping up across the country. These newcomers offered a different kind of shopping experience. No frills, low prices, and a focus on value that resonated with budget-conscious consumers. Initially, Sears seemed unfazed. They were the undisputed kings of retail, with a long and storied history of success. But these new rivals were not to be underestimated. While Sears rested on its laurels, Walmart and Kmart were busy building efficient supply chains, mastering the art of low-cost retail, and attracting a growing customer base. Sears Tower. As Sears' empire expanded, so did their aspirations. In 1973, they unveiled a breathtaking symbol of their dominance, the Sears Tower in Chicago. This magnificent skyscraper, piercing the sky with its 110 stories, stood as the world's tallest building for a quarter of a century. It was a towering testament to Sears' success, an exclamation point on their reign over the American retail landscape. Imagine standing on its observation deck, gazing out at the sprawling cityscape. From that vantage point, you could see 4 states, a fitting metaphor for Sears' vast reach and influence across the nation. The Sears Tower became an iconic landmark, a symbol of American ingenuity and corporate ambition. It represented the pinnacle of Sears' achievements, a physical manifestation of their decades of success. But even as the Sears Tower stood tall, the retail landscape was undergoing a seismic shift. New competitors were emerging, consumer preferences were changing, and Sears would soon face challenges that would test their resilience and adaptability. The Kmart merger. Fast forward to 2005, and Sears, facing mounting challenges and declining sales, made a desperate move, a merger with their longtime rival, Kmart. The $11 billion deal was touted as a way to create a retail powerhouse, a combined force that could take on the mighty Walmart. On paper, it seemed like a logical strategy. Two struggling giants, pooling their resources and expertise, could potentially regain their lost market share. But in reality, it was more like tying two sinking ships together and hoping for a miracle. Both Sears and Kmart were burdened by outdated business models, inefficient operations, and a failure to adapt to the changing demands of consumers. The merger did little to address these fundamental problems. Instead, it created a larger, more complex organization with even more challenges to overcome. The hoped-for synergy and revitalization never materialized. The merged company continued to struggle, losing ground to its more nimble and innovative competitors. The Kmart merger, rather than being a lifeline, became a symbol of Sears' decline, a desperate gamble that ultimately failed to save the once mighty retailer. The catalog disappears. But perhaps the most significant misstep in Sears' long and winding journey came in 1993, when they made the fateful decision to discontinue their iconic catalog. Now, you might be thinking, well, catalogs were becoming outdated in the age of the internet, right? But the Sears catalog was more than just a book of products. It was a powerful distribution network, a valuable customer database, and a beloved brand, all rolled into one. Here's the real kicker. Sears killed its catalog just as a little thing called e-commerce was starting to take off. Amazon, founded just a year later in 1994, essentially took the Sears catalog model and brought it into the digital age, revolutionizing online shopping. Sears had all the ingredients to become an e-commerce powerhouse: the infrastructure, the customer base, the brand recognition, and the logistical expertise. But instead of embracing this opportunity, they essentially handed it to Jeff Bezos on a silver platter. It's a classic example of a company failing to recognize and adapt to a disruptive innovation. Sears, once a pioneer of mail-order retail, missed the chance to become a leader in the burgeoning world of online shopping. This decision would haunt Sears for years to come, as they watched Amazon grow into the e-commerce behemoth it is today. What was your favorite item to shop for at Sears? Mounting losses. As the 21st century began, Sears found itself teetering on the brink. The merger with Kmart, far from being a magic bullet, had failed to deliver the hoped-for revival. Their stores, once bustling hubs of activity, were now often perceived as dated and uninviting. Their once revered brands like Craftsman and Kenmore were losing their luster as newer, more innovative competitors emerged. Perhaps most concerningly, a new generation of shoppers was coming of age with little to no emotional connection to the Sears name. They had grown up in a world of online shopping, big box stores, and instant gratification, a world where Sears seemed increasingly irrelevant. By 2010, the financial picture was bleak. Sears Holdings reported its first annual loss in decades, a stark indication that the company was in serious trouble. The once mighty retailer, a symbol of American ingenuity and consumerism, was now hemorrhaging money and losing customers at an alarming rate. The decline that had begun as a slow trickle in the 1970s had become a torrent, threatening to engulf the entire company. Sears was trapped in a downward spiral, struggling to adapt to a rapidly changing retail landscape and failing to connect with a new generation of consumers. The future looked increasingly uncertain for this once iconic brand. The question was, could Sears find a way to reinvent itself and stave off the inevitable, or was its fate sealed? Edward Lampert. Enter Edward Lampert, the hedge fund manager who orchestrated the Sears-Kmart merger and became the CEO of the newly formed Sears Holdings. Lampert was a Wall Street prodigy, known for his financial wizardry and his ability to spot undervalued assets. But running a sprawling retail empire? That was a different ballgame altogether. Instead of investing in the stores, improving the customer experience, and adapting to the changing retail landscape, Lampert focused on cost-cutting and asset liquidation. Imagine you're running a marathon, and instead of training, fueling your body, and strategizing, you decide to sell your running shoes and ration your water. That's essentially what Lampert did with Sears. He sold off valuable real estate, slashed inventory, and reduced staff, all in an effort to boost short-term profits. The consequences were predictable and devastating. Sears stores, once vibrant and inviting, became increasingly run down and understocked. Customer service, once a hallmark of the Sears experience, deteriorated as staff morale plummeted. Lampert's financial maneuvering might have made sense on a spreadsheet, but it failed to address the fundamental problems plaguing Sears. The company was losing its relevance, its connection with customers, and its ability to compete in a rapidly evolving retail environment. Lampert's reign as CEO would become a controversial chapter in Sears' history, a period marked by declining sales, store closures, and a growing sense of despair among employees and loyal customers. Bankruptcy. The final blow came in October 2018, when Sears Holdings, burdened by debt, declining sales, and a failure to adapt to the changing retail landscape, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. It was a somber day for American retail, marking the end of an era for a 126-year-old institution that had once been a cornerstone of the nation's economy and a symbol of its consumer culture. The company that had weathered 2 world wars, the Great Depression, and countless economic storms had finally succumbed. It was a stark reminder that even the most iconic and seemingly invincible brands can falter and fall in the face of relentless competition, shifting consumer preferences, and disruptive technological innovations. Sears' bankruptcy was a watershed moment, a symbol of the challenges facing traditional brick-and-mortar retailers in the age of e-commerce and the rise of online giants like Amazon. It served as a cautionary tale for other established retailers, underscoring the importance of adapting to changing times, embracing innovation, and staying relevant to a new generation of consumers. The fall of an American icon. Remember those bustling Sears stores filled with the promise of the American dream? By 2017, they were becoming a rare sight, like relics of a bygone era. The retail giant that once boasted over 3,500 locations across the nation had dwindled to a mere 685 stores. It was a heartbreaking spectacle, like watching a mighty oak tree wither and shed its leaves, branch by branch. But the store closures weren't the only blows that Sears suffered. The company began selling off its most prized possessions, the iconic brands that had been woven into the fabric of American life for generations. Imagine the shock and dismay of loyal customers when Craftsman tools, the trusty companions of countless DIY enthusiasts and home workshops, were sold to Stanley Black & Decker in 2017. The Craftsman name had been synonymous with Sears for so long that it felt like a betrayal, a loss of identity. And the dismantling didn't stop there. Kenmore appliances, known for their reliability and value, were put up for sale, as were die-hard batteries, the powerhouses that had jump-started countless cars on frigid winter mornings. It was as if Sears was selling off pieces of its very soul, leaving longtime customers heartbroken and wondering what, if anything, would remain of the once proud retailer. This desperate shedding of assets was a clear sign that Sears was in dire straits, struggling to stay afloat in a retail landscape that had dramatically changed. The company that had once been a symbol of American ingenuity and consumerism was now fighting for its very survival, clinging to a fading legacy. Please comment 1 to let me know you'll be watching this video until the end. The true impact. The demise of Sears wasn't merely a business failure, it was a societal shift, a seismic event that reverberated through the lives of countless Americans, leaving a void that many are still grappling with today. For generations, Sears had been more than just a store. It was a trusted companion, a symbol of quality and dependability, and a cornerstone of communities across the nation. Its decline and eventual bankruptcy represented a profound loss, a rupture in the fabric of American life. Think about the families who had relied on Sears for everything from baby clothes to lawn mowers, from tools to appliances. For them, Sears' decline wasn't just about finding new places to shop. It was about bidding farewell to a cherished part of their family history, a familiar presence that had been a constant throughout their lives. How many of us can recall those nostalgic moments spent with our parents or grandparents, poring over the thick Sears catalog, dreaming of future purchases and planning for the year ahead? Those catalog browsing sessions weren't simply about acquiring goods. They were cherished family traditions, opportunities to connect, to share aspirations, and to build lasting memories. And let's not forget the loyal Sears employees, many of whom had dedicated decades of their lives to the company. These weren't just jobs, they were careers, a source of pride, a sense of belonging to the Sears family. The company's decline brought uncertainty, heartbreak, and, for many, unemployment. Imagine the emotional toll on those who found themselves suddenly jobless in their 50s or 60s, facing a job market that had transformed dramatically since they first donned their Sears name tags. For countless customers, the loss of Sears was deeply personal. It wasn't just a place to buy things. It was a place where life unfolded, where milestones were marked, and where memories were made. It was where you got your first bicycle, where your mom bought her first washing machine, where your dad taught you how to choose the right tools. Each store closure felt like losing a piece of your own personal history, a tangible reminder of time's relentless march. Closed, 20 forgotten mall stores that no longer exist. Remember the excitement of weekend mall trips, the bustling food court, the arcade buzz, and your favorite shops. But what happened to those iconic retailers that made malls magical? Join us for a nostalgic journey as we uncover the stories behind the retail giants that once ruled the scene but have now vanished. A loss of trust and optimism. The shockwaves from Sears' downfall were amplified by the perceived indifference of those at the helm. While loyal employees faced unemployment and customers mourned the loss of a beloved institution, executives seemed preoccupied with financial maneuvering rather than preserving the legacy of this American icon. It was as if they had forgotten that Sears was more than just a business. It was an integral part of the nation's social and cultural fabric. The impact reverberated through communities as well. In many towns, Sears had been the anchor store in the local mall, drawing shoppers and generating foot traffic for surrounding businesses. When Sears closed its doors, it left a gaping hole, both literally in the mall and figuratively in the community's heart. Other businesses that relied on Sears' presence often struggled to survive, leading to a domino effect of closures and a decline in the local economy. Towns that once bustled with weekend shoppers were left with empty parking lots and a sense of desolation. For many Americans, witnessing Sears' slow decline was like watching a slow-motion car crash. They could see the inevitable outcome, but felt powerless to intervene. Each announcement of store closures or brand sales was met with a mix of nostalgia, sadness, and resignation. Social media became a virtual gathering place for people to share their Sears memories, offering eulogies for a cherished institution that was fading away. The demise of Sears also marked the end of a certain kind of American optimism, the belief in a brighter future built on hard work, ingenuity, and the promise of upward mobility. Today, the aisles may be gone, but that spirit, that belief that ordinary people can understand extraordinary things, lives on in fragments. Whether the company finds its way forward in this digital century or not, its legacy has already shaped countless minds. That alone earns it a place in the story of American innovation,